growing logarithmically or exponentially, and this is the price of sending a message over the internet. So the point is that technology affords us all these wonderful things. This is the resolution of a microscope. Some of these things are bound asymptotically. You can't get any more resolution on a microscope, unfortunately. Well, who knows? Maybe we will be able to, but as far as my little mind can comprehend, it seems very hard to do so. But compute seems to be on this Moore's law that'll never end. So why do we have things like that we're dissatisfied with, right? Where is technology not working? And I think that we know a lot about that. There are a lot of sort of stubborn points in technology that don't seem to be affected. This is life expectancy. So life expectancy seems to be on a negative sort of second derivative. Hopefully, thankfully, still a positive first derivative. But there is this sort of like feeling like, oh, life expectancy isn't shooting up that much. And I meet a lot of people in crypto that are into longevity, and it feels like we're not getting there, at least with that kind of curve. And what are the effects of, we see so many things on the first slide I just showed that don't seem to translate into some of these other inputs. For example, national healthcare expenditure has been growing very significantly since 1970. And I gave this talk at some Ivy League circuit that I did before my extended vacation. And it was interesting because healthcare expenditures really started to boom starting in the 60s. And it wasn't because of me, I wasn't born yet, but it wasn't because of an ancestor of mine. It's because we actually crave healthcare. It's something that we have virtually an infinite demand for. Healthcare is something that absolutely no one in this room would say, no, I don't want to be healthy. But there is a limit you have for other goods, right? There is a point where you say, you know what, I don't need to spend more money on food. I don't need to spend more money on rent. But healthcare has got this very special sort of place where we're willing to consume more healthcare at all times. That's why healthcare is now 25% of our GDP. My guess is as we get wealthier and wealthier as a country and a society, thanks to technology, that healthcare might even reach 50% of GDP. And it's because we all want to live longer and we all want to be healthier, but we don't seem to be getting that. If we look at the amount of new drugs launched every year, which is a decent surrogate, I think, for health. If you think about the early part of the drug industry, I was going to say but I'll just say the drug industry solved a lot of problems, like infections. Solving infections with antibiotics resulted in lifespan increasing dramatically at the start of the century. Anesthesia, things like that. There's a sort of dearth, and then pharma had this renaissance period in the 90s, which kind of got me interested in pharma around the time of the human genome decoding. And pharma solved like virtually 80% of chronic diseases, in my opinion. And it was this revolution. And now with oncology sort of being cracked, there's sort of a question as to what's even going to happen after the end of that curve. But it would have been nice if that curve went up and to the right, just like some of the other curves did. And there seems to be a problem with that. Even though the drug industry has gotten really big, we're not getting more drugs every year, which seems sort of strange, even though we're spending more and more money. So there's a lot of problems, and I think that, I don't know if I have a solution for you today, but I'm going to take a crack at it. One of these pain points is, to me, actually, it comes from the doctors themselves. And as you may know, one of the reasons that I became somebody that can get a room with people like this, and not just some random, startup guy or hedge fund guy that nobody would come see, is because I was very defiant and sort of mad when people got mad at me. The normal corporate reaction to a scandal is to do one of these and say I'm sorry and disappear and just sort of keep saying you're sorry. But my reaction was sort of different. My reaction was, no, I want to explain why I'm right and you're wrong. And I know more about this than you do, and I'm going to take you to task on every single point. And that's sort of a losing battle in a lot of ways. But it's a battle I was willing to lose anyway. And I think most people would see that as a little crazy. So I certainly am not intending to blame anybody in this discussion, but I want to point to the largest expense in healthcare is actually physicians. 10% of healthcare expenditures come from the pharma industry. 90% of the rest of this, in fact, I think 100% of healthcare ultimately centers on a physician decision. So the question is, what can we do about that? The number of physicians in our country has not changed very much. And I think that the reason for it, in fact, this is a graph of the number of med school graduates every year. It's very, very limited. We're not seeing more and more med school graduates. Physicians make about $350,000 per annum. And it's a very healthy salary for a job that increasingly we have to wonder if we're getting value for that. A lot of people feel that the AMA is a group that tries to make sure that the physician stays rich. It's a group that tries to make sure that they can control the pool of doctors in the world, especially in our country. there are about 30 doctors per 100,000 people in America. And again, you can see that the number of new MDs every year is only about 30 per million. So we're going to see sort of a crisis, I think, in the number of doctors, actually net doctors, kind of dropping again, which at a time where our demand for healthcare consumption is just going up and up and up forever, I think it's a really big problem. So what's the solution? I think that we could have a decentralized doctor. I think that AI basically can break the back of the lobby that physicians have. I remember that Barack Obama asked doctors when he was coming around raising money, I had the luxury of meeting him, and he told me that there was a AMA dinner that he had. And he said that he's going to lower healthcare costs, and I really clapped. And he's a great speaker. And then he said, but you're all going to have to tighten your belt too. Room was dead silent. There was, the idea that doctors are going to tighten their belt for anyone is sort of a scary idea. And the question is, like, well, how do we break this barrier? The AMA is the group that makes sure there's a certain amount of med schools, there's a certain amount of med schools authorized to grant the medical degree, and that they have a certain authority to grant so many graduates. Nobody else can break into this without their permission. And that's like the cartel. That's the opposite of decentralization. That's like a mafia, like the dudes I hung out with in prison. It's really not, to me, something that's a great thing. Of course, again, I love doctors, a lot of doctor friends. At NYU, there's the Martin Shkreli professorship in nephrology. So they're doctors that have saved my life and my friends' lives. I'm not here to go against doctors. But I am here to think about how do we get those step changes that I showed a slide or two ago, where I used to have floppy disks, and now on my phone I can store 100 gigabytes. I used to not be able to sequence anything in a genome. Now you can sequence it in a minute. All of these things I used to be able to read all the literature on a subject, and now I can't read 1/10 or 100th of the literature on a subject. Why are we getting that kind of stuff in healthcare? And I think one of the big barriers is doctors. So I am coming out with a product we'll talk about in a second, but there's other disadvantages of doctors. I do think cost and price is the biggest one, but I do think there's a lot of variability. We're lucky to live in New York. In other parts of the world, forget America, but in other parts of the world, you're lucky to get a good doctor at all. I have a friend who lives in Idaho, and he says it's weeks before he can get an appointment. I think that the amount of time you get with a physician is something that everybody has experienced with this sort of very quick, 2-minute interaction of, oh yeah, you're fine, I gotta go. And it sort of feels like a really not great experience. To me, I always remember to ask a question for the doctor 20 minutes after the appointment's over. And I have to wait till the next time, and by then I forget as well. So there's also the limits of human knowledge. I'm happy to see so many familiar faces here, but I have some friends in here that we've spent so much time studying one little space. Like, we made this drug for this rare disease called PCAN, panauthenate kinase associated neurodegeneration. It's very, very rare disease that very, very few people know about. Even neurologists who are supposed to be specialists in this illness don't know what that disease is. And I can't blame them. It's very hard to keep up with that medical literature slide that's going up into the right very quickly. Most doctors don't have the time to read the New England Journal every week, let alone sit there on PubMed and go through every new finding, go to every conference. They're busy people, they have to treat patients. So it's really hard to defy the limits of human knowledge. So I've launched a product called Dr. GPT, or Dr. Gupta. Dr. Gupta, well, it's GPT with 2 more letters, so I figured it's okay. We also have Dr. Lim, which is large language model, so there's a few ways to slice it. But this website is up right now. It's dr.clinconnect.io. And we've been training this thing over the last few weeks. It's been a very hectic couple days in AI. Today, some people joked it was the Super Bowl for nerds when GPT-4 came out, and it certainly was cool. But also, the Facebook model was also leaked, I think intentionally. But regardless, it's been leaked and is now available. So we've been spending every waking hour, me and Nibbles, trying to get this thing to work. And we are basically trying to see if can a doctor really be automated. And I think the answer is conclusively yes. I don't have a. Maybe I do have a graph. Here it is, actually. That's it, UI, I guess, for Dr. Gupta. But this is a graph of basically a test that the US MLE test, but a group of other tests have been done as well. And this is the performance of automated systems on that test. And at this point, humans score around an 80. Extremely good doctor scores a 90. It's about a 70 to pass the boards to get licensed as a doctor. And Google's latest platform is scored a passing score to become a doctor in America, which is sort of a big deal. Our product is free, so it's available 24/7. Of course, we're going to try to make some money on it somehow, but I think in general, being able to give a physician's advice, a quality physician's advice to the whole world for free is something that could bend that cost curve and allow those resources to maybe be used more effectively. I think that there's 22 million people in America that work in healthcare, the actual provisioning of healthcare, which is an enormous number. And the actual ratio of doctors to non-doctors is kind of staggering. So I think that there are obviously limitations to an automated doctor. I think it'll work for some specialties better than others. I think that over time, though, my dream or vision is that we basically don't even see doctors anymore. We go to phlebotomists, we go to nurses, we go to people like that, and the computer will analyze our scores and tell us what's wrong with us. And I think that if you look at the success of ChatGPT 4 released just today, ChatGPT 3.5, which is what Dr. Gupta is powered on with some of our own special sauce, ChatGPT 3.5 could not pass the bar exam. ChatGPT 4 scores in the 95th percentile of the bar exam. So very quickly and very scarily, AI is becoming extremely good. And while there's a number of regulatory barriers, there's probably a number of personal barriers, there's a number of barriers of all kinds that people are going to wonder about AI physicians. I did a podcast with a comedy show last night, and it's available online. It's called Voicecast. And they had some funny ideas as to why maybe you don't want to take your clothes off in front of the AI doctor. But regardless, I think that the day of basically relying on human specialists is coming to an end. We sent out a contract yesterday using ChatGPT for a legal contract. So ultimately, I think whether you use this or not, slowly but surely the age of AI is coming, and we can use this to sort of decentralize and depower. Again, to me, this has nothing to do with a blockchain. I do want to make an API that's free. It would be amazing if we could get a large language model on a blockchain somehow. Not sure I'm smart enough to figure that out, but I do think that some people are working on something like that. And so the more you can pull this out of sort of one company's hands, as much as I'd like to have all that real estate to myself, it's going to get more and more decentralized. Technology is a race to the bottom. And we've learned that from even OpenAI, who slashed their own price 90% just in a couple of weeks. So ultimately, in tech, sometimes you get it while it's good, and then you have to move on. So I would have no problem if somebody made this and made it even cheaper, even faster, even freer. That's something that's just sort of natural in this line of work. But I do think that's sort of one of the major solutions to healthcare. And again, no disparagements to physicians who work very hard and they try very hard. But ultimately, AI does things better than us at certain dimensions. Certainly, it's a better chess player than any human chess player. We shouldn't assume it's a better video game player in many different video games. It's even now a better poker player, which a lot of people felt couldn't be done. There's no reason why AI couldn't become a better physician than a human. And that's sort of a new product I have coming out soon. So I want to talk about scientific compute very quickly. A lot of people here have probably heard about my project called DrugLike. DrugLike is just sort of the start of what I hope is going to be a suite of tools that scientists can use. Scientific computational tools are very, very hard to use. You have to be a Python expert. You have to be a Linux expert. You may have to be a Kubernetes expert. These aren't things anybody wants to be an expert in unless you want to be an expert in that, but the average scientist doesn't. The average chemist doesn't want to learn how to provision a cluster of AWS machines. That they want to be a chemist. And so the problem is you make these tools if you happen to be an expert at that one thing. And so we have this crazy list we show in another slide deck of scientific tools. It's just hundreds and hundreds of random Python libraries. And they're really hard to use, so we make front ends for them. There are other companies that do that. Schrödinger is a successful company in the pharmaceutical space, but there are big companies that are 50 times bigger that nobody's ever heard of, like Ansys, Cadence, Synopsys, Hexagon, are all bigger than GM. But you don't see commercials for their products. They cost millions of dollars, and they're very, very hard to use. As a kid, my dream was to be able to use products like that. I forgot to mention it earlier, but what really got me into computer programming was SETI at Home, and of course Nibbles. But SETI at Home was a distributed compute network. There was no blockchain, which actually came with some liabilities. People would upload fake data on SETI at home. SETI was the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. And it was sort of, it was done by NASA. It was a little bit inspired by the film called Contact, one of my favorite movies, where they take radio telescope data and everyone could sort of analyze this data little by little to see if ET was phoning home. And so far they haven't found anything, but ultimately, maybe the weather balloons, I don't know, but ultimately that was one of the first distributed compute projects ever. And when I hear distributed, I think decentralized. And when I think decentralized, I certainly think of DeSci. So I think that we can make some really great tools, distribute them, and get people to use them. One of the problems that we've seen is that scientists don't just change their workflows very quickly. And that's something that we're sort of in it for the long haul to do that. So DrugLike is our first product. It's been out for a little while now. It's druglike.com. It's the only product like its kind on the web. So when I was a kid, I always wanted to play around with this type of stuff. I love chemistry. I always wanted to sort of use a tool that I can actually, like, I don't know, make a potential drug with or something like that. It was always my dream to do that. And that's one of the reasons I got into the pharmaceutical business. But there was no tool that was available for anyone. I couldn't even hack or steal a tool. These things were so hard to get that they were just cloistered behind a couple of companies that could afford tens of millions of dollars of software costs. So we put it on the web. It's free. There's no license agreement or anything like that. And we also made free compute. So you can use up to a certain level of free compute. After that, you have to pay. Ultimately, we hope that people will use or even abuse that tool for their own benefit. If you just press refresh, it'll give you another set of compute for free. So that's one easy hack to do that. So we're in the midst of making a molecular dynamics tool, which is a little bit different from ligand docking. Molecular dynamics is when you simulate on, depending on how you look at it, sort of a QM level of whatever bodies you're simulating. It's a sort of many body problem that scales exponentially as you add more bodies meaning sort of atoms. This is a very important tool for both pharmaceuticals, but as well as material science and other fields. We're working with a professor of fluid dynamics, and circuit simulation is ultimately the biggest space in this, is doing electronics and circuit simulation. So we're making tools like that that hopefully we'll release over the course of the year. We think that, again, we're a for-profit company that hopes to make a lot of money, but we also think that we're in a new era of software where you have to let your user try your software, hopefully extensively. When you join AWS, you have a free tier that's pretty expansive. You can host a whole sort of websites, servers, and all that for free. And Heroku has a similar tool, and we think that's really important. If you are at Pfizer and you really want to use our tool, you're going to have to pay us a lot of money. But I think that if you are just a person, a kitten in your bedroom wondering about how to mess with chemistry, we want that person to gorge themselves on our tool and learn a ton. And we're rolling out stuff like that over the course of the year. I think that eventually, this stuff can move to the blockchain. I was talking to some of you earlier about how, there's this crypto ethos about, like, this purism that I think is actually kind of detrimental. I think we have to take baby steps. Right now our product is on AWS, and we're moving, hopefully, in the next few months to adding this WASM, WASM's WebAssembly, and WebGPU, which means that we can use your actual computer to do some of the calculations. And we wouldn't charge you for that. We charge you because AWS charges us. So if you want to provide your own compute and you have a bunch of computers you want to use, you should be able to do that for free. And that's something we're doing. WASM Workgroup is our idea that if you have 50 of your friends that also want to give you their free compute to your project, you should be able to make your own little supercomputer, and we're working on that. Eventually, there should be a blockchain system. These are very, very hard to engineer. We were just at ETH Denver talking to people in the state of the art, trying to figure out what is the best way to take a massive compute job, chop it up, and send it out to a whole bunch of untrusted nodes, get them to calculate that, reassemble them, and send them back, and get paid to do that the same way people mine Bitcoin. I think about these Bitcoin machines, these vast arrays of ASIC miners, and I sit there and say, why can't we use that for drug development? It's such a waste. I hope no Bitcoin maxis sort of get mad at that, but I do think, I do wonder if using a percentage of the world's electricity to calculate random numbers is really a good use. Again, I think it's important to make it hard to hack Bitcoin, but I also drool at the opportunity of wanting to do this. Just 10 years ago, we bought a very expensive software package from one of the companies. It didn't work at all. We couldn't even get it to run successfully without it crashing. and there was no distributed compute. We had to talk to a company called Cray that makes literal supercomputers. So the world's changed a lot in 10 years, and I think that it'll keep changing. So hopefully, whether it's Akash or some other compute network, there's a number of them like Golem and others, that hopefully we can sort of find a way to solve that problem. So I'll move a little more quickly. There's a couple of other spaces that DeSci could target. I'm not targeting these spaces, but I'm certainly interested in watching somebody do it. Electronic health records is one of the craziest ones to me. Most people don't have a copy of their own EHR. You should have 100% control of your EHR. You should be able to give a doctor read-write access for half an hour, right? Not have a company like Cerner or Epic have control of, or a hospital have control of your EHR. To me, that's just totally crazy. Regulators should focus on that instead of me. I think that the idea that we have this exact technology. In fact, zero knowledge is hand in glove for this. Zero knowledge proofs are the perfect tool for a committee reveal some of my data. I want this doctor, this hospital to see some of my data, but not all of it. Instead, right now, a lot of that data lives in a place that we just don't know where it is or how it's working. And I know some people are working on exactly this problem in the DeSci world, so it's pretty exciting. Clinical trials are the most expensive part of developing a drug. If clinical trials were cheaper, we'd have 3 times as many drugs. We'd have possible drugs for Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, a lot of the tough diseases that haven't been solved yet. How do we do it? I don't know. This is a really hard problem. Again, regulators, in this case, I think do a good job of protecting us. But I know there are people, my friends, that are setting up ships that are just on international waters, so they want to do clinical trials on these ships. Crypto people are crazy. I know people that are developing their own medicine to take by themselves for just themselves, and hoping that that medicine's safe enough. These are things even I wouldn't do, but I think that it's an interesting idea to try to crack this problem of why does it cost $200 million to study 200 or 300 or 400 people to get an FDA approval. And the FDA is very rigorous. It's hard to get people to do a trial without money. Doctors, the first thing, my experience, I've run a lot of clinical trials, the first thing they ask when you want to do a clinical trial, how much money is it going to pay me? And again, I can't fault the doctor for asking that, because ultimately if it's a money-losing proposition and you're a physician, you may say, you know what, I have to sit this one out because my practice, I'm used to this and I don't want to lose all this money by running this clinical trial. So it's not as altruistic of a world as sometimes we're led to believe. So anyway, the group that can crack this, I know there's a lot of people working on it, decentralized clinical trials and decentralized ideas. Even if you can't get something for FDA approval, if we did a blockchain clinical trial of 200,000 people, it's not like a real clinical trial, but if it showed that, let's say metformin, which is a drug I know a lot of crypto people take, would increase our lifespan by 10%, that's not Class A evidence that the FDA would take, but it's a lot better than what we have now, which is just sort of guesswork. So I do think the blockchain could do something here. Publications, I talked to a bunch of people before this started that brought this to me, and I think that this is one of the layups that we could do. We have something called Archive, which is the start of a huge decentralized movement. There's a lot of sort of parasitic publishers out there. A lot of people don't like Springer Nature, Elsevier, companies that have made tens of billions of dollars, basically on the back of scientists. Companies that now, you work hard to make a paper in Nature, and now they make money off your paper in Nature. They're a publishing company, right? It's like writing a book for free for, if Michael Crichton or your favorite author decided to write books for free and the publishing company made all the money. It's very odd that we do this in science. So how do we do this without it? I think there's a lot of people working on this, and it's probably going to be one of DeSci's first major victories. In fact, if you exclude the kind of blockchain, which I'd encourage you to do, Archive, which is ARXIV, pronounced Archive, Archive was basically the first major victory for that. And I think that the problem with academic science is you need to publish a lot, and you need to publish in the best journals. And the problem with that is the best journals are often run by a bunch of sort of older people you don't know that you have to get into that club before they'll publish you in Nature or in New England Journal or wherever the case may be. It's really hard as a young scientist to, even if you have a groundbreaking discovery, people say that Einstein would not be able to get published today. And I truly believe that. I could easily see that manuscript being rejected. And we've seen a whole list of manuscripts that got rejected relatively recently over the last 10 or 20 years that were groundbreaking ideas. The Transformer paper, which arguably is one of the most landmark discoveries in computer science, was never published in a journal. So I think that self-publishing and things like that could lead to great success. Incentivization of replication. If I'm a funder of research, I might say, you know what, I'll give $50,000 for the experiment, but I'll give $50,000 to the place that replicates it. And I think that's something that can encourage positive behavior that we don't get today. So why decentralize? There's just a couple of general themes. Those are all my ideas for sort of healthcare and science. I think that some of this is relatively obvious. We can do a lot with decentralization by hardening systems, and it doesn't have to use blockchain, but to avoid sort of single points of failure, there are a number of ways to sort of focus it on. I see that a bunch of people are doing DAOs for like specific things, like hair DAO is, from what I understand, a DAO to cure baldness, which is pretty wild. There's a number of other DAOs that go to specific sort of goals, and I think that's pretty cool. But to me, I think probably the best place to go is some of the stuff that like DBDAO and others are doing, where could you avoid replicating data that people have already done? Every day, thousands of experiments are done at different labs without knowing that somebody's doing the exact same experiment down the hall. And sometimes you wonder if you really need to do that. The other part of decentralization is distributing. So I mentioned some of the distributed compute. Folding at home was the successor of SETI at home. Folding at home is a lot more well-known and reached a lot more people, but it was inspired by SETI at home. And to this day, Folding at home and other at-home projects are being done on a distributed basis. So again, these aren't necessarily blockchain enabled. I do think they could benefit from blockchain, but there is a lot of benefit to distributing in decentralization. And I actually think you could lower costs. A lot of people wonder why you want to do sort of drug or molecular interaction analysis on blockchain. I actually posit that you can actually have a lower price than AWS. AWS has one problem. It's a fantastic service. The problem is Amazon. Amazon needs to make a lot of money. They make a fortune on AWS, and that makes it very hard for them to give you a really good price. Whereas if somebody's willing to do it at cost, that's something that somebody might do on the blockchain. And we've seen that with Bitcoin. Democratization is something that decentralization helps a lot with. We mentioned archive briefly. One of the things that people want to do is sort of democratize the FDA. I think, again, sort of a crypto libertarian thing that's even too much for me. I think that we probably do need an FDA, but I know people that believe that the FDA is evil and terrible, and I totally don't think that. I think they're great, but, and I'm not just saying that, every other part of the government's, I got choice words for, but the FDA actually I think does a fantastic job. But to the extent that those people, it's not my choice, to the extent that those people believe that we don't need an FDA and we should be able to take whatever medicines we want based on our own criteria, not theirs, then blockchain is a place for you. And I think that people will be doing that democratization. And again, privacy is to me a part of democratization, and being able to secure information through ZK is pretty important. So last but not least, I want to thank everyone, of course. I guess one of my slides generally have like missing text, but I have a last message. There's sort of this weird group I've been a part of over the last year that's starting to gain a lot of prominence called EAC. You may have seen it in my profile or something like that. It's basically a reactionary movement to EA. The poster child of EA, incidentally, was Sam Bankman-Fried. So far we're doing all right. But the EAC group is basically effective, instead of effective altruism, we're called effective accelerationism. And I just wanted to introduce the concept in the group to the greater crypto community, because I think they go hand in hand. The thing about EAC that most people know about us, and we just did a call with Grimes of all people the other night, we've had Mark Andreessen change his Twitter profile to accelerationist, which is a big win as well. Our group is started by a bunch of people like Google and Facebook and other major tech companies that basically got sick of the censorship and the kind of the fear that exists at these major companies about releasing technology. And I think that if there's anyone that could appreciate it, and I'm sure there are people in here that probably would agree with the EA side of it, which is we have to slow down AI before it kills us all. We think it's nonsense. We think that technology is what human destiny is all about, and that we want to accelerate AI, we want to accelerate blockchain, we want to accelerate every new fringe technology that will become mainstream over the next 100 years for a better life for everyone. And the EAC movement certainly would welcome everyone. A lot of us are crypto people, some of us aren't. But ultimately we have an anonymous leader who is a very, very important person in technology who's doing a great job of sort of fighting the tide of regulation and fear in AI. There are people who are saying that a quick story is called Rocco's Basilisk. The idea behind Rocco's Basilisk, has anybody by show of hands heard this story? Okay, okay, cool, we got a couple people. So the idea is Rocco is going to come and get us because 100 years from now, this superhuman AI, which some people think will be 3 years from now, this superhuman AI is going to take over the world, and he's going to ask one question. Who amongst you did not want me to take over the world? And he's going to take revenge on you. And this idea is kind of chilling. And in fact, for a bunch of AI people, it made them like turn their computers off and like take a vacation because it was so scary to them that that could actually happen. That person, that AI, that instantiation, that technology, maybe it's GPT-4, would ask itself, which one of you tried to stop me? Which one of you said that I should not come here today? And there are people, some senators in fact, that actually want to regulate AI. They actually want to say that if you have any kind of neural network, you should deposit your code with the government first. And that we should take a look at it and kick it around and make sure it's not going to do anything bad. And then you can use it. And that's a serious discussion that people are having. And to the extent crypto, to some extent, is about liberation, freedom, that's a very, very scary sign to people like me, who I play a very small role in this cult. The cult leader is a very, like I said, sort of a bigger leader in technology. I'm just sort of doppelganger. But I think that we have to take care of whether it's blockchain or crypto and even AI, and make sure that the powers that be, which is us, make sure that the powers that we've elected understand that these are technologies that we want and need, not technologies that they're going to allow us to have. And so it works the same way as that. So anyway, thank you so much for your attention and time. I'm happy to take questions. Go to a place after. I don't want to. This fund has been really nice in letting us hang out here for a while, so I don't want to overstay our welcome.
Does anyone have any questions for Martin? We'll do a couple questions. Someone must have a question.
Just shoot it out.
Yeah, so with Dr. GPT, I think a lot of people stick with their PCPs because they've developed a relationship over time with them. How are you thinking about adding memory to your agent and sort of doing that sort of thing?
Yeah, the hardest thing about large language models is they don't have state. They're stateless, basically stateless calculations of large tensors, and they don't remember anything. You can ask it the same question 1,000 times, and it will not. You can tell it, I love Coca-Cola, I love Coca-Cola, 8,000 times, and then you can ask it, what's my favorite drink? I don't know. And to me, it shows how naked GPT is, and it also shows, I think, the EA, AGI safety community, how stupid they are, because ultimately, these things aren't that smart, and they're not going to get that smart anytime soon. So I've spent a lot of time, I actually published an AGI written book, which is really hard to do, or I'm sorry, a GPT written book on Amazon, so you can take a look at that if you want. It was really hard to get this book to work. So we're a long ways away from being able to do some of these things. I do think that Dr. Gupta will become your friend, but ultimately it's up to us to make that work. And again, if I can take 5% of healthcare costs and lower them, that's $200 billion a year. So ultimately, Google took the advertising market, which is fairly small, and made themselves one of the biggest companies in the world. By doing something like that in healthcare, you can do really well and help out people, especially people in other parts of the world that getting a doctor is really hard. GPT is fluent in every language, which is kind of amazing. So I hope that it can start to get a personality. We've programmed this meta state that sort of keeps track of some of the things you're talking about, and that kind of is a controller of the LLM. So the programming is much more intricate than you might think. You might look at Dr. Gupta and say, oh, that's cute, you took the GPT API and you connected it to it. No, it's a lot of programming, and it's really hard to do because it's stateless. And again, the people at OpenAI did a really good job with ChatGPT because they did a similar thing where they had to sort of help the conversation remember itself. So it's a very tricky programming thing. It'll get easier over time, and I think even with GPT-4, you're going to end up liking your doctor. Anybody else?
Yeah, I mean, a little bit piggybacking on that. For the last 100 years, you've had people worried about this new tech's going to take away our jobs since a lot of it's in. Maybe it's better to think of it as a complement rather than a substitute to your doctor. So, I mean, I see it more as, instead of having 10 doctors, I have one doctor, and this, I'm still going to see my doctor, the doctor is in my personal relationship, but the expertise is going to be this GPT, which is probably better than that doctor's memory. I don't know. So maybe in terms of how you market this product, turning that statement into a question, do do you think that really it's not about antagonizing the physicians, but getting
Absolutely.
some physicians on board and having physicians lead the charge?
We just demoed it to Memorial Sloan Kettering. We got a rave review. One of the top neurosurgeons there said that he loved to use it, not because it's smarter than him, but because I've read the New England Journal every week since I was a teenager, and it has a, for better or worse, it has a, every week there's a clinical case from Mass General where it's like a mystery. It's like a Dr. House in real life. And they list all the narrative, and at the end they say what happened. And I fed some of these cases into Dr. Gupta. They're extremely hard to figure out. And one patient had brucellosis, which is insanely rare infectious disease. Dr. GPT figured it out before the real life doctor did. So occasionally you're going to get that win. A lot of the times Dr. Gupta didn't figure it out. But the key is that one time where a doctor says, man, I got this guy dying in this ICU and I don't know what's going on. Throw this thing in that GPT thing, let me know if it works. And if the GPT solves the case 1 out of 10 times, listen, it doesn't cost anything. And those kinds of clinical assistant tool is what we're calling it. It also helps on the regulation side. These things could help a lot. And again, I think one of the spaces that people are really excited is taking on, which a lot of people, I think virtually everyone, agrees is a space that nobody would cry if it went away, is a legal space. So, it's a bit different from what we're talking about today in science, but legal touches science as well. Anyone else?
Yeah, how does the landscape of malpractice play into all of this?
Yeah.
And who assumes liability?
Yeah, we've thought about that a lot too. That's why we're starting a company in an island called Vanuatu. No, it's a tough question. I think that there's a lot of questions about this. Llama was leaked by accident the other day by Facebook, and it's on 4chan now. And 4chan put it on torrent, and now the whole AI community has been wrestling it to the ground over the last few days. And people have asked, well, are we stealing this? What's going on there? And we've all collectively decided that we're not, because it's just a list of weights. And those weights can't be copyrighted or patented. It's sort of one of these things where I think technology leads the regulation, not the other way around. Uber is completely illegal, right? Uber's against the law, right? Why would you have a taxi medallion service if it were legal? Or why would you allow Uber to exist if you had people paying millions of dollars for taxi medallions? Taxi medallion in New York is now worthless. Regulators could have shut it down, and in certain states and cities they tried. But the same regulators, on their way to the meeting to shut it down, are going to their Uber and deciding, I gotta go, wait a second, what am I doing? This technology is so good, I can't kill it off. So what we're trying to do, incidentally, is we're gonna try to do a double-blind study where we put 100 doctors in a room, this John Searle's Chinese room experiment, feed them in the clinical case, and they have to feed out the clinical case in text. And we do the same thing with ChatGPT. Then we get an impartial panel of doctors to score on a double-blind basis which came from which. If we can beat the doctors, I actually think it's about practice not to use it. Because ultimately, if we can prove, it's sort of like self-driving cars. Elon Musk's full-service drive is not going to be flawless. It's going to kill somebody by accident. But we have 50,000 automotive deaths a year. So if that drops to 10,000, I mourn all those 10,000 people. But at the same time, I'd say we save 40,000. And ultimately, which is the better of the two? Clearly, I'll take full-service drive. And we shouldn't be suing Tesla every time somebody gets into a full-service drive accident. So I hope that malpractice will drop, right? Doctors aren't perfect. The 85-year-old doctor who you see might write the wrong prescription or just by having sloppy handwriting, which all doctors are joked about having, is going to write the wrong thing. So to me, I think that the imperfections of AI are going to also are going to match and hopefully be less than the imperfections of humans. I hope that helps them. So I don't know is the short answer, but.
What do you think is the role and place of a project like Folding at Home in a world in which AlphaFold exists? Does it complement AlphaFold in certain scenarios or for certain problems or instances of the protein folding problem?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, all these things still require some compute. And we had a talk with a zero knowledge expert today who said, I talked to a bunch of scientists and there actually isn't, compute's not a scarce resource. And I sort of, had to be really polite because I think there are things where there's certain algorithms you can run that take almost no computing power. Then there's stuff that we can't even imagine, like a planet scale idea. Like for example, could you try to simulate, hundreds of thousands of atoms, like a whole cell? It's impossible. You could do some meta simulation, but to actually simulate each molecular interaction is impossible. Would scientists like to do that? You bet. That would be amazing. So how could you actually do something like that? So for AlphaFold, folding is the shape of the protein is just one small step. I always get people who, they're not intentionally trolling me, but it feels like it, when they ask me if the drug light is about folding proteins. Folding protein is the, making up an analogy on the fly, but it's the first step of setting up the easel. After that, you have to decide which molecule fits into that fold. So you fold the protein and it's a three-dimensional structure, and you can quibble about what that structure looks like. It's very important. You know, and traditionally you'd use X-ray crystallography. With folding, with AlphaFold, you can actually do it computationally. Great. Whichever fold you use, now you need to do the heavy-duty lifting, which is what drug light does.
I'm curious what the competitive space for a drug light is.
Yeah, so
who are you scared of?
yeah, I mean, we're up against a lot of older companies that have software that is impossible to use. So this is a very small space. Drug-like target market, like the hope for revenue someday for us is about 10 or 20 million. I've had drugs that sell more in like a week. So it's very much a, you know, a labor of love. You know, I think it's an important tool, but it's definitely not the only tool we're going to make.
Who should be scared of you then?
I think Schrodinger is who we're sort of coming for. Schrodinger makes the best tool. It's awesome. It's just $100,000, you know, per person per year. And after that, you need to pay for compute. They don't give you a stitch of compute, so you might pay millions on that. And you got to pay for integration, so they don't like have a connection or a pipeline to many tools. So it's a really tough system. I hope to eat their lunch. You know, I'm sure that they'll be fine, but you know, we'll see.
So what's your future vision of Dr. GPT? Is it become a generalized tool that people just ask a question, or it become a customized to like I can upload my history of medical history, ZT knowledge to the Dr. GPT and it can give me more personalized advice?
Yeah, no, it's 100% personalized. We do want you to upload your history, medical history. He'll actually ask you over and over again. So if you try to change the subject, he goes, listen, I don't want to talk about that. And if you curse at him, he'll say, I'm sorry, that's inappropriate, but he just drives you right back to the conversation of what medicines are you on? How tall are you? Et cetera, et cetera. And he stores that, and then from then on can give you personalized information. For like an advanced service, people are really interested in their health. So let's say you have migraines. I have a close friend that has terrible migraines. And she wants to know if anything new happens in migraines. We could have something like Dr. Gupta, every time you have an appointment with them, which is whenever you feel like, he can say, hey, by the way, there's new research on migraines. This could be something that you're interested in. There's new medicine. There's new something. And that can kind of be a more interactive tool where it feels like your doctor is like your unlimited resource where you could ask any question or have it explain anything to you. Anyone else?
Who's the buyer for Dr. Gupta?
Good question. So what's amazing about GPT is how cheap it is. So we've been running this thing nonstop for several days, and I think our API bill is like $7 or $17 or something crazy like that. And we're using 20 different computers at Amazon to run it, and that bill is like $1,000. So to me, I'd feel very weird like forcing people to say, oh no, you got to pay a bunch of money to use it. I think that ultimately the buyer is the average person and a physician. So you could have like expert mode where it's doctor to doctor. Hey doc, I have this case. What do you think? Oh, as a doctor, I think that you should do this. And that could be a doctor pay like $100 a month or something like that for it. And for the average person, I really do want to make sure it's free. I think that my partners and investors probably want me to make it so that you can talk to it 3 times a month, and then maybe the 4th time we want your credit card number, and the 5th time you're going to get a bill, and you know, that kind of thing, the traditional SaaS kind of business. But ultimately, what scares me about that is that anybody can make, I think, something like a Dr. Gupta. I think ours is the best, and we're training our own models, and we're doing all kinds of stuff that'll widen our moat, but and as far as I know, I asked around the AI community who's doing this, and they named a guy that works for me. So so far so good. But we'll see if we can keep that moat. But the nice thing about decentralization is that no capitalist can like go into technology thinking that they're safe. The same way Schrodinger thinks that they're safe and they're going to dominate the ligand docking molecular modeling space. You know, every company, even Google, is now looking very vulnerable to OpenAI. So.
Do you think the average clinician trusts like the average person enough to like just take their like text-driven input and make a diagnosis from it? Because I feel like when I go into my doctor, like they'll listen to what I say and be like, cool, let's run these tests and like let me give you your real diagnosis like from the tests themselves. So I'm wondering like how you see that interface going, right? Like if you're selling direct to the average person, like how do you deal with this like data augmentation that like actual clinician would have?
I think there's a subset of clinicians, a subset of humans in general, that just have this kind of like negative attitude. And it's just poor bedside manner, people call it, or bad customer service. But my dad just went in for prostate cancer scare, and he said that he just couldn't get a question in to the doctor. You know, the doctor's just hurrying him off and, you know, disrespecting him basically. My dad's, relatively smart and relatively fluent in English, but he doesn't come across great. And the doctor just shoved him out of his way. And I can imagine what it could be like sometimes, maybe as a minority, or maybe as whatever, somebody who doesn't speak English, going to an American doctor and getting treated like dirt. To me, that kind of person deserves the same health care that I do. When I go into the doctor's office, I tell them what to do. You know? But the reality is that how informed you are is a function of how much respect the doctor may give you. And a lot of doctors won't give you respect regardless. WebMD is the real answer that I'm trying to say here, which is that people go on WebMD before they go to the doctor and convince themselves they have interstitial pulmonary fibrosis. And the doctor's like, you got a cold, come on. You know, and I think that, you know, we all know somebody like that. But ultimately, I don't think more information is going to be punitive. I do think that my goal would be to turn the doctor into a relic, that the only doctor left is a surgeon. And even that could be done by a computer, and arguably increasingly is. So I think that slowly and surely, when I get really mad at doctors, I say kind of a pretty pejorative thing. I call them very overpaid plumbers. But it's
Disrespectful to plumbers.
it's very hard to fix a toilet. But no, in all seriousness, WebMD, I mean, if you've ever studied treatment algorithms, like of hypertension, you say, okay, if patient is doing the X, then do Y. If patient's Y, then do Z. And it's fairly cut and dry. And I think doctors have this very exalted place in society. Part of it is artificially created. And I wonder if, like, through ChatGPT, we can go to doctors and say, wait a second, doc. Like my dad, for instance, doesn't have prostate cancer, thank God, but the doctor wanted to put him through every test imaginable. And I told him, Dad, I think that doctor's just trying to rinse a couple dollars out of you. I don't think you need 6 MRIs. I don't think you need a prostatectomy. I don't think you need this and that. And he's like, really, Martin? Because he scared the shit out of me. And I said, listen, I know prostate cancer, you don't need this stuff. But a ChatGPT, not everyone's son is the farmer, bro. But if you have ChatGPT, you could ask it and say, do I really need this? Or is this doctor just kind of fucking with me? And I think that second opinion role could be good too. I don't know if that answered the question, but I did.
Yeah.
How are you thinking about using or not using people's data who are kind of querying everything?
Yeah, this is
There's
probably
probably some lightning questions, so just like.
Yeah, it's a really hard question. Sorry about that. We
That's
gotta
all
run.
right. No.
I did pick a bar out. I automatically forgot its name as soon as we figured it out. Do we remember the name of the place that we can go?
Oh, we have another talk after, so.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay, well, let's wrap it
no,
up
but
then.
like, there's a couple more questions over here. I just want to make sure everyone gets their questions.
Yeah, so it's
But,
hard. Like, I don't want to go to jail again. So I think that the storing people's data in a compliant way that's works with the law is a really good idea. I still think there are people that are going to say, you know, I don't care about the law. I want this advice. And there are powers that be that are going to say, this is a medical device. This has to be regulated, et cetera, et cetera. And that battle, HIPAA is a law for a reason, and it should be a law. It's a good law. So we have to make sure that one of our programmers can't just jump in and see his ex-boyfriend or girlfriend's data and say, oh, look at that. I knew it. That would be a terrible, terrible thing. And that happens at companies like Uber and banks and things like that. But it's going to be important that we don't store that information unless they want us to store it, and we can't see it unless they want us to see it.
Okay, Maya.
Yeah, sorry. I kind of had a question to that point about data collection, right? Like, is there a minimum threshold that you need to know about a person and tests that you need to run? Like, not to frame this like in a Theranos way of like, oh, we need like one pinprick of blood, but like, I think to the point of health disparities, that's going to be driven by, even gathering information about your height or like your blood pressure. A lot of people don't have those tools. Like, how much data needs to be gathered by a doctor, and perhaps how could you work with the doctor to gather that data, and then...
Yeah, no, that's one of the revenue opportunities to somebody's question about a customer is eventually there's going to be questions Dr. Gupta can't answer. In fact, immediately. And I think one of the ways we could do it is kind of like being a ZocDoc and saying, hey, you need to go see somebody in your neighborhood. Do you want to see Dr. Smith? By the way, Dr. Smith's paying me $20 to tell you to go see Dr. Smith, but do you want to go see Dr. Smith tomorrow at 2 o'clock? And I think that's something that could be a good, kind of a matchmaker and help people get their health outcomes. But it's a good question. I mean, I don't think that, there are elements like psychiatry. Physician probably doesn't need to see you. In fact, most psychiatrists are moving to telehealth now. So that's an example of a place that would work really well. Oncology, I'm not so sure, right? Like, so everything's a little bit different. Neurology seems like it'd be almost impossible. Dermatology also seems tricky. So like, there's a bunch of things where the doctor kind of needs to see you. So I don't think doctors will go the way of the dinosaur, but I think even, like I said, 5 or 10% savings in healthcare would be incredible win. Well, thank you everyone. I really appreciate it.
We have a gift for you, so you can see it. But we made you a DeSciNYC beaker.
Wow, thank you.
Yeah, and you are the first, so you can also see it has the Statue of Liberty with a little beaker holding it. It's like a little black. So cheers to that, and thank you for the great talk.
Thank you. Thanks.
And I'm just gonna give a little talk. There's a couple things. If anyone, we have some books in the back. We had a book signing last night for 2 of the books I wrote. If you want one, you can have it and we can sign them after. And also, if you want a mug or if you pre-ordered a mug, just come up to me after and we'll get you your mug with the DeSci stuff on it. And then, okay, so like what Martin talked about was like clinical trial data and how to collect it, and like that would be one of the interesting things around decentralized science. So I'm going to talk about the stuff that DBDAO is doing to help people collect clinical trial data. So the first thing is like what is DBDAO? And it's kind of like an Airtable for Web3. So here's like a quick demo of how it works. Might need to tether the data. Might need to tether it. So it's like a it's like an Airtable for Web3. Some Wi-Fi here. Connect. There we go. Okay, does this work now? So this is just like a little screen recording of how it works. So if you're like a clinical trial, you first like create a table of what you want. So in this example, we're just going to say that we're like a butterfly. We want to say we want to collect every butterfly in the entire world. So this is like a very distributed problem. And the way you would want to do it is you would want to create like a form and then send that out to people all over the world so that they could enter in the butterflies that they're seeing. And I think this is like a cool example of like where decentralized science works. So we go here. So we create a form around butterflies of the world, and we say, the first thing we do is we say like, we want to collect all the different species, so we create a row in the database for that. And then up at the top you can see when we create a row, column, there's also these other columns here around NFT, Block Explorer, and IPFS. So this isn't like a normal Airtable. It's something where when somebody submits their data to the database, they're not just lobbing that over a fence and that's the last they've ever seen of their data. They're creating an encapsulated like data packet that lives on IPFS and that they can show that they own using an NFT. And that NFT is then part of this larger data set. So when you go to your wallet or when you go to OpenSea, you can see every piece of data that you've ever submitted. And this is like a very cool thing. Like when you submit data to Facebook, you kind of lose track of it. But here you just go to your wallet and you go to OpenSea and you can see every piece of data that you've ever created online. So we have these different things here. And what you do is you have IPFS, whatever. So now we create a form for this. So we want to be able to have people populate this. So we say the form is called butterfly form, and then we get this form and we send it out, get a link to it, and we send it out to all the people that are interested in it. So I'm from Santa Cruz, so I would click the Monarch, and that submits it to the data set. But you can see here that Monarch is actually in my wallet. So this is OpenSea, and this is living on the blockchain, the piece of data that I have contributed to this data set. So you can also see it on Block Explorer, and you can see it on IPFS. So this is like a really simple primitive, but I think it has some cool, like how it's being used is really cool. So like Martin talked about, HairDAO is using this to test out clinical trials on different hair loss drugs. And this is like a really game-changing way of doing a clinical trial. because it's not about going through the FDA, or the drug that they're actually testing out went partially through FDA, but then kind of got sidetracked when another company, French company, bought it out. But there's this drug called RU58841 that looks fairly promising, that doesn't have quite the efficacy that would be needed for FDA approval. But they're repicking this back up, and they're using DBDAO to power their whole data collection process. So you can see their form, they've created this whole patient portal here, where you upload your whole genome file as a DCF, you upload your treatment report, which drugs you're taking, how it worked. You can upload photos. All of this is stored on IPFS. It's encrypted using keys on your own. And so this is like a very new way of doing it. And the other thing that's really interesting about this is like Martin was talking about, it's much cheaper. So they're sort of leveraging the fact that there are these communities on Reddit of hundreds of thousands of people that all will almost for free, or because they want a cure to some sort of problem that they are facing, they will contribute their data. And in many ways, they contribute it not under traditional HIPAA or HIPAA like things. They just want their data to be public so that they can find a cure for this stuff, and they want to be recognized for that, which is a different way of thinking about how traditionally clinical trials are done. Another one that we're working with is this company called Altaflora. So Altaflora is like a traditional Web 2 database or Web 2 clinical trial company. And one of the things that they're doing long COVID studies for people that want help with long COVID. They're also doing things that would otherwise never get through FDA approval. So the one that they're interested in is giving CBD to kids with epilepsy. So this is not something, seems to be fairly promising based on sort of what I'm reading online and what they're telling me. But basically when you give a kid CBD who's having an epileptic seizure, it basically like subdues them and helps to cure it. But this would never be able to go through FDA trials. So they're trying to do this on their own. And I think this is like another way in which like they're a traditional Web 2 company and sort of we came in and just like swapped out their backend, and now they're running, they can run on DBDAO. I think there's some other cool things about like why like Web 3 needs a database. You're incentivizing people to create data so that right now you have no incentive. When you put data somewhere, you don't get anything back. And I have this concept of like negatively priced data. So normally I put something on AWS, it costs me money. But what should happen is AWS should pay me for the data that I put on them when I monetize, as they monetize it. So that's sort of like what you could do with like a Web3 database where you can have other people monetize your data. Data permanence, this is a bigger problem in like academic research. Basically like a server will crash, someone won't get tenure in a lab, grad students are always doing other things. So you have academic research and a lot of the data just sort of disappears. This is a bad idea, but when you put it on the blockchain and you have a universal naming structure, it sort of always lives forever. Another one that is problematic with existing databases is you can't link between rows very easily. So having a flat namespace where you can link between different data sets, what I think will enable new types of inference. You can encrypt things, it's tied to your identity. There's just a lot of benefits. So the way it works is like you put in your data into the data set. It has to be accepted into the data set. So someone eventually, say I have an X-ray. I submit it to the database, and then it has to go through a curation process. So the whole database is actually run by a DAO. And the DAO is a multi-sig that either accepts a piece of data into the data set or rejects it based on their criteria. But once it's accepted into the data set, you're then entitled to the rewards that that database generates. So let's say you have a bunch of X-rays and some lab wants to get access to those, so they purchase them all. So they'll purchase the whole data set for $100. Then 30% will go to the person that curated the data set, so they'll get $30. And then the other 70% goes to the people that contributed the data. So each person will sort of get, if there's 70 people that contributed, each person will get $1 every time that data set is bought for $100. And this allows for residual data. And the other thing that's really cool about this is everything is like an NFT. Each piece of data is a token. So you can start applying all the normal DeFi protocols to data now. So I can lend out my data, I can stake my data, I can get a loan on my data based on the cash flows that it's generating. everything is encrypted, so we can encrypt columns or rows using this thing called lit protocol, which basically allows you to encrypt certain areas of it. So you can, that's nice. And yeah, the business model I talked about, basically like when revenue is generated, it's split between the various people that created the data. And I think another interesting thing here is to look where the underlying the underlying value comes from. So traditionally, like, one piece of data isn't very useful. But when you put together 100 pieces of data, you created something that's more than the sum of the parts. And normally that more than the sum of the parts would just go to Facebook or Instagram or someone else. But here we're taking that excess information, excess value that's been created, and redistributing it to the people that actually contributed to the data set. So that's like where the value is coming for the person that is buying this data set. If you want to work together, we're always open to working together with new projects. We're working together with some sociology projects. We're working together with some insulin projects. We're working together perhaps with bio and molecules and stuff. So we're always looking. You can just reach out, DBDAO.xyz, contact, or my Telegram is right. Oh, here's where we go. My Telegram is here. Go, Michael. Thank you guys. I appreciate it. Does anyone have any questions? Yes.
Yeah, I was curious on I'm really interested in that kind of the monetary split and how you do that. And is that something, so I get that like you guys would need like 10% or something, but is that something where like the split you made sounds kind of good in general, but can individual projects kind of say like
those are example splits.
Yeah.
So basically those splits will be written into the smart contract so that you can't be like rugged with the terms of service update.
Right. Cool. Yeah.
But those are examples.
Yeah.
That are not set in stone.
Yeah, I can see different projects having different.
Exactly.
Kind of like the Scout in some cases does a lot more work than others maybe. Yeah.
How will you verify that the data is not like faked in any way?
Yes, so that's the job of that it's not what?
Like faked in any way.
Oh yeah, so that's the job of the curator of the data set. So the curator of the data set checks to make sure data is either good or bad before guys in the back. The person who's the curator checks to make sure that the data is either good or bad, and they need to have domain expertise to make sure that like they understand it. So if it's like X-rays, that person needs to know if it's an X-ray data set. Or if it's like sociology research, that person needs to know. I mean, you can need to know in many ways. You can check the data. You could verify where it's coming from. So it could be like a whitelisted group of people that submit it. It's very dependent on different types of data set. Yeah.
I'm surprised this has been like a lecture or two about data and health, and genomics wasn't anywhere in there.
Well, Herdow's doing the VCF file here.
Okay, the VCF.
Yeah, so they're uploading your genome file, and they're extracting out various parts of. This goes a little bit. They've really thought this through, and we power the backend, but we actually had them come talk here another time, and they know a lot more about the genome stuff.
I was gonna say when you go to the literature, like find all of these like SNPs related to different diseases and stuff, like trying to actually decipher what that actually means, even when you have the VCF, it's very difficult.
Oh yeah, I mean this is a next level on built on top, I guess.
Yeah.
Someone else. That's another level of abstraction. Anyone else? Oh yeah.
Is there any way to deal with like curator bias with the data sets, or is it they have the ultimate decision on whether data is getting added or removed?
Yeah, that's a great question. Basically, every decision is written on chain.
Okay.
So you can look to see if a curator is systemically rejecting certain pieces of information, and you can see like assuming it's not like there's different things if it's encrypted or not, then you have an issue. But like generally, every decision to accept or reject is an on-chain decision. So you can, in theory, write a ChatGPT bot that will read over every single decision that the curator has made to accept or reject pieces of data and give us credit score, sort of, to the curator bias. And what's cool is you could have a ChatGPT bot that you make, and I could have a ChatGPT bot that I make, and we can get different scores, which is I think is a healthy thing. And yeah, so it's kind of like case law in like the legal system. Like you can look to see every decision a judge has made and determine if that judge is biased.
How do you remove bad actors?
For
curatorial process.
Oh, then that's just a people's movement. So if you shouldn't participate in a data set if the curator is biased, and you should start your own data set. That is
free roam, free frame.
Yeah, that is
it's not like well, you can't do slashing at Avalanche, right?
Yes.
It's not slashing. Is what you're saying.
Yeah, you just go to a different data set that's not biased. Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, thank you guys again, and feel free to just mingle and talk, and then we'll go to a bar after. And yeah, again, thanks for coming out. And we're hosting another one on April 12th, I think. I'll double check, and I'll send out information about that in a follow-up email. But yeah, thanks again for everyone for coming.
Thank you. Oh, my bad. Can I help you?